Well, here we are again one more time, and this week we're talking about 70s music and how punk music really paralleled the development of disco. Very interestingly, both of them were sort of a New York phenomenon about 1975, but two completely opposite. You can't get much further apart than disco and punk. So very parallel tracks. So the punk movement really a rebellion against 70s rock and roll that many people thought had become sort of bloated and cocaine fueled. And the punk movement starting in 74, 75, 76, especially with the Ramones here in the United States, in New York, down at CBGB's in the Bowery. CBGB's a very important club there in New York City. And then the Ramones put out their first album in 76, went over to England and really influenced the English bands. Again, a real parallel with the situation in the mid-50s, the American groups influencing the English groups listening to the American rock and roll of Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Elvis Presley. Same thing happened again in 75, 76. The Ramones go to England and influence all the English groups, and then that music gets re-imported to us through the Sex Pistols and the Clash. But a very interesting time, really kind of kick-started music in a lot of ways, led to the whole new wave movement. A new wave meaning bands such as Blondie, Talking Heads, Elvis Costello, the much more pop type bands that later many turned into MTV bands. But this was a good time, a very fertile time, late 70s, early 80s, very fertile time for some very fine songwriters. Elvis Costello and David Byrne from Talking Heads specifically, very fine songwriters from this punk thing that later turned into new wave. Anyway, the parallels of that punk music and disco music, and also cocaine, how cocaine just exploded in the United States. We'll look at that in this chapter, in this section, in this folder, through the developments of two men, Pablo Escobar in Colombia and George Young in the United States. We've talked about a little bit before, some information on those two people, and how America got addicted to cocaine really through two different people. And we're still sort of in that era today, except a lot of the cocaine has shifted to the homegrown crystal meth. And what a mess it is. But I really want to talk about some of the historical things that were going on in the United States very quickly, so we can sort of hang this music era onto the history of what's going on. So early 70s, we have the Vietnam War still going on, and Nixon's trying to de-escalate the war, to bring some people home. And he did get reelected in 72. Nixon is reelected in 72. 1973, an end-of-war agreement is declared. By 75, we're pulling everyone out of Vietnam. Everyone is gone by 75. But Nixon has a problem in that Watergate happens. There was a break-in at the Watergate complex at the Democratic National Committee. Nixon had approved some of his people to break into the Democratic offices so he could do some spying on them, and later lied about it. And it always seems like the trouble that politicians get into, Democrats and Republicans, remember Bill Clinton was pretty good at lying on the witness stand too, is they get in trouble, then they lie about it. They try and lie their way out of it, which never seems to work. So Nixon is out of office by 74 because of Watergate. He resigned. He was not impeached. He resigned in 74. Gerald Ford came in. The Vietnam War is over. 45,000 deaths in Vietnam. 45,000 GI deaths, American soldier deaths. The war is over. The hippie movement is over. And now the cocaine thing is coming in. And two different music styles are coming in. Punk versus disco. Disco very much escapism against things such as the war, and the economy is getting worse. Jimmy Carter is elected in 1976, and lots of parallels between Jimmy Carter's one term in office, 76 to 1980. He was defeated by Reagan in 1980. Jimmy Carter, lots of parallels between Jimmy Carter and President Obama. Carter approved a bailout for Chrysler. Why are we always bailing out Chrysler? 1979, a bailout for Chrysler. Lots of inflation and recession and deficit problems during Carter's time in office. The Soviets were in Afghanistan during Carter's time in office. We're still in Afghanistan, but now we're doing the fighting. Problem spot of the world. Fuel shortages, the high price of gasoline. Gasoline went from, believe it or not, 38 cents a gallon to $1 a gallon, and people were flipping out over $1 a gallon. There was a Arab oil embargo. We couldn't even get oil and gas, and there was a rationing system. And I remember this: long lines at the gas pumps, fights at the gas pumps. Then we went to a rationing system every other day. If your license plate ended with an odd number, such as a 1 or a 3, you could buy gas on odd numbered days: the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th. Even number, the same thing. So you could only buy gas every other day. Carter's popularity declined very rapidly, from 66% to 35% in just a couple of years, again similar to Obama. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Then finally, Carter, in Carter's reign, 76 through 80, the Iran hostage crisis. I believe in 1979, the Iranians, the Iranian students, took over the American embassy in Tehran, Iran, and took 52 people hostage. There was a few more than that originally, but some were set free and some escaped, but 52 eventually. The Iran hostage crisis, they were held hostage, these Americans, in Iran for 444 days, and Carter tried and tried to get them released and was unsuccessful. A botched rescue attempt with helicopters in the desert over in Saudi Arabia, and the helicopters crashed and people died, and the Iranians just hated Carter with a passion. Would not release the hostages until Carter was out of office in 1980, or was it 81? I can't remember. But anyway, as soon as Reagan came into office, the Iranians released the hostages, basically ruined Carter's chance for re-election. So that's what's happening through the second half of the 70s, 76 through 1980, with Carter in office. Cocaine explodes, disco explodes, then we have the counterforce to disco, punk music with the Ramones. The Ramones head to England. Sex Pistols and the Clash re-import punk to the United States. Punk transforms into new wave with some of the more songwriter type bands, and then MTV takes over and these songwriter type bands buy into the MTV concept. But that's next week. MTV next week. See you then.